Hello and welcome to Turning Point Tactics, the competitive Killteam 40k podcast focused on giving you the strategies and tactics to seize initiative every turning point. I'm your host Ryan and I'm joined by the grim darkness to my far future, Connor. How are you doing this evening, Connor?
Good, thanks, Ryan.
And we actually have our very first guest on the podcast, renowned as quite possibly the nicest meta chaser in the UK and the glue that holds the London competitive scene together. We have Pete, aka WorzleMuffin. How are you doing tonight, Pete?
I'm doing great. What a wonderful introduction. Great to be here.
So, on the subject of introductions, if we were to imagine that there's a few people out there who haven't been down to a London tournament in the UK, believe it or not, is there a way that you could introduce yourself as who you are and why people should know about you?
Yeah, so I guess most people would have heard of me in connection to being one of the London Wargaming Guild organisers. And so we're a bunch of TOs in London who organise regular tournaments in the London area. And so as part of that, we organise, on average, probably a tournament a month over the last year across different venues in London. And also we've been involved in creating various map packs for the different kill zones available. So maps for the Pairings kill zone, Nakland, and Chalnav. And we've shared those more widely, and that's definitely helped put our kind of scene on the map as well.
I know I've been playing on those map packs for quite a while now and trying to get them pretty far and wide. You sort of said that you have been organising quite a few tournaments. Why did you choose to organise Killteam tournaments instead of, like, say, 40k or another skirmish-based game? What is it about Killteam in particular that's drawn you to it?
That's a great question. I mean, well, Killteam was the game I played. I was really into it in last edition, and I was mainly a player in last edition. I didn't really do any organising. That wasn't until kind of COVID happened and we were all kind of banished to the TTS wastelands for about 2 years when we couldn't play in person. And then when things started up again, I realised there weren't really any kind of tournaments being planned for Killteam. And I was like, well, if no one's going to organise them, then I'll just throw my hat in the ring. And so I got back into organising around, August last year. Organised my first couple of tournaments. And the new edition happened, and fortunately I managed to find a bunch of other people who were interested in organising and helping TO, and that kind of grew into what was the LWG Killteam series this year, which culminated in 12 events over the past year, which was a really great number to achieve, and I think we've kind of grown from strength to strength in each event so far.
I think it's one of those things, like, it is no mean feat to do a monthly tournament and to make it so regular and really such high quality. I'm going to just quickly skip back to the TTS Wasteland because I think it's really true, because it is a very different play experience between TTS and real life. But we actually first became connected through TTS, playing in, I think, some of the EU Blitz series and that sort of stuff. I remember you were running Hunterclade back in the old edition. And now I think you're really probably the person to blame for me annoying you at so many competitive tournaments in London, because if you hadn't invited me down to some of the first tournaments you organised down at Bad Moon, then I probably wouldn't have been so invested in the tournament scene. So there you go. So everyone out there is listening, it's Pete's fault, is what I'm trying to get at. But
I do feel some responsibility for this, actually, because obviously I played a lot with you and Mark over lockdown on TTS, and I never realised what monsters I was creating when it comes to London, and just win all our tournaments, and destroy the kind of local player base.
Yeah, because
that was the end result.
It's both me and Mark, and obviously you just come from a tournament where Mark has gone and played second of Warhammer World. He's done, I think, 10 plus placement finishes over the last sort of ITC season. So yeah, you've really you've made the two worst monsters in the competitive scene potentially, but we'll see. But obviously back then you were playing Hunterclade. Is that still what you're playing now, or have you gone through any sort of other teams?
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of cycled through a lot of teams at the start of the edition, and so I know at the start of the edition I was determined to make an elite team work. And initially I was going I'm going to play Deathwatch, and I think I even bought some Deathwatch bits from you, which I've now never used because unfortunately my Deathwatch are not very good. And
great deal for me.
Yeah, exactly. I cycled through Death Watch. They weren't good. So I was like, okay, I'll try. Heretic Astartes. They're allegedly the best elite team. Went to my first tournament, played in the Vicious, got absolutely smashed by Bart. I was like, oh god, these aren't any good. And I think I played Warp Cover next, and I was like, okay, this is an elite team, but they got a bit more skills to them, and they got Zangors, so they're kind of they've still got a good player base, but they're also incredibly hard to use and very kind of too many decisions to make with them.
Pseudo elite, aren't they? They're not fully elite, but actually, well, maybe in the latest update that they can go fully elite. But yeah, they're the halfway house, I guess.
Yeah. And then I think after that, I was like, screw it, I'm just going to play what's strongest. And then I think the next tournament I borrowed a friend's Pathfinders because and this was pre-nerf Pathfinders as well in the glory days of 1 CP worthy cores and grenade spare and whatnot. So I was like, oh wow, this game's a lot more fun if you can if you're playing the strongest teams. And then since then I've kind of jumped between mainly Pathfinders, Legionary, and now Hunterclade is the team I've kind of settled on as my kind of go-to team.
So weirdly, what you did, you started off with playing elites when they're really weak, and as soon as Intercession has turned up on the block, you're like, nah, I'm done with them now. I'm over to playing Hordes again. So it's like full circle back to Hunterclade.
I timed it terribly because now elites are on top, and you can have a very good tournament experience playing elites. But I'm not, but now everyone's playing Intercession or Legionary, and I don't want to be, I think still part of me wants to be a little kind of special snowflake, and so even though Hunterclade are very much a meta team, they still aren't that popular, so I still feel a bit special playing them.
Yeah, well, they were popular for I guess at the highest of competitive levels, maybe, because obviously there's 3 of them, wasn't there, at New Mexico. But other than that, in our local meta, I think there was only 2 that turned up to the London Grand Tournament. You and Bart. And I don't think we've seen too many more. Actually, to be fair, I think Guy's played Hunterclade now, and it might be growing. We'll see. But it's definitely an interesting time. So full circle back to Hunterclade, and that's where we are now, which is pretty cool. So obviously the sort of the focus of this episode, to keep us on track, is to talk about tournaments, and I think to try and get some of the experience as you as both a player, as you say, during last edition and into this edition, but also as a TO to try and get some of that value that you've had during your first year or year and a bit, I guess, organising the LWG scene. That's not hard to say. So if we start with, you said you've organised 12 tournaments. If we begin with the player perspective, it's probably most people will care about. What do you think is important as a player to bring to a tournament, and then we'll go for the TO perspective afterwards.
Yes, I mean, as a player, I think you've got the obvious things. So you need to bring your models, you need to bring your rules. But then I think in terms of kind of playing it, I have a few things which I've seen kind of other players other players have commented on me using them and being like, oh, that's a good idea. So I thought I'd highlight those. One of those is that I have a couple of dummy models which I use as kind of to check kind of essentially it's kind of, if I'm playing Hunterclade, for example, I've got a Space Marine on a kind of the same base as the Skitari, which I kind of spray painted lead belcher. And if I ever need to check, whether this model can fit somewhere or how far this model can go, I use my kind of my Space Marine figure to do that, because it's kind of, you don't always have a spare model, or a kind of a dead model at the start of the game, which you can use for that. And B, if I leave a Space Marine on the table, I'm never going to forget that's obviously not part of my kill team. Whereas if I use a kind of a spare Skitari model, occasionally I'll forget to take it off, and they'll be very confused as to how I've got one of my models there, or kind of how I've suddenly gained an extra model. So I find that helpful, having a few kind of proxy models which you can use to check how far you can get and range and things. The other thing I find quite useful is you get those kind of 12-inch rulers and all the various starter sets. If you cut one of them to 9 inches, that's sort of the kind of perfect distance for a kill team. Because generally speaking, you don't need to measure more than 9 inches, and then you can kind of bend it around, and kind of check distances kind of quite quickly by using that on the kill zone. And the other thing I always like to have, and this came in handy at Warhammer World naturally, is having a set of objectives to use, and by that I mean objectives which are 4 inches in diameter. So you can put those on the table, and then it's very clear exactly when a model's on an objective, when a model's not on an objective, and it really just saves some time kind of measuring, which could be better spent playing.
I think so. Just touch on that. Like, I think you've also got skeleton models, and being able to measure distances effectively as well is two of the huge things. It's lucky for Connor because he always has spare models because he plays so aggressively. One that there is no way that he doesn't have a spare legionary laying around midway through the turning point. But
I think wrapped up in 10 minutes. That's my game.
Yeah, exactly. We're not here for a long game, right? We're here for a quick one, right? So. Yeah, but absolutely, that is what it is. It's a model on the correct base size, right, for the team that you're playing. So you can check to see, does he fit through the right gap? Does he make the charge? Can he be seen behind this bit of terrain, or whatever it is? I think that's a really good point of or a tip for you to take is like just take a spare model with you, and it'll be so useful at all times during the game, and it stops that whole picking up, moving a model, accidentally putting down in the wrong place again, or anything like that, which is really nice. And if you are playing something like in session, don't forget that maybe you might need like a 10-inch ruler because you also get that +1 movement as well. So I think that's some really good advice.
I think it shows fairness for your opponent as well, because you don't have to touch the model you're thinking of moving. So then there's no chance of them going like, well, actually he wasn't there. He was a little bit to the right when you put him back. If you never touch him and introduce this new model and plonk him down somewhere, then you can always take him away and you know exactly where the model started.
Absolutely. Sweet. So Pete, same sort of question again, but this time from a perspective as a TO. What sort of recommendations do you have from that tournament organizer perspective? What sort of things do you prepare or bring to a tournament to make sure the guys have got everything that they need?
Yeah, so there's a few things which I think you'll always need if you're running a tournament. One of those is table numbers, so people know where they're playing. And the other thing I find really helpful is an event schedule. So people know exactly when rounds finish and when it's time to get ready for the next one. Because especially with an event schedule, you can put all the information, in the mission packet or elsewhere, but people forget about that, or it's hidden away on a web link somewhere. So it's good to have that kind of material kind of on a wall somewhere at the venue so people can quickly reference when they need to. The thing that I find for our tournaments, which really helpful specifically, is in all our tournaments we have a fixed terrain layouts per board. And so we'll set up a table for a particular mission at the start of the day, and it will stay that mission all day. And so what we found really helps with improving the playing experience is having those boards, as well as having the terrain layout set out. You also have the objectives laid out, as well as a deployment tape marked out. So you mark out the deployment zones with a very thin masking tape, and you've also got the objectives on the board. And that saves quite a lot of faff at the start of the game, which is otherwise spent by the players setting those things up. And then the final thing we like to have next to each table is a printout of the mission, which just explains, the primary for the mission, the scoring conditions, and then that again just saves you having to refer back to the core book. And so the idea is that you can turn up at a table, and your a table is kind of good to go as it is.
And I guess the idea of all this, right, is to save time for the players at the event, right? Because I think when we first started, we were on 2-hour rounds, and that meant that you could only really get 3 rounds in a day. But as your tournament scene has been growing progressively throughout the year, that means that you're not getting the undefeated winner or enough rounds in to have any sort of definitive placement, really. So that's sort of the idea of this marking out deployment zones and putting objective markers out, isn't it? Is to save that sort of time.
Oh, 100%. And I think just those small changes, I think you can save up to kind of 10 minutes, because it's just a lot of faff kind of putting those things in yourself. And also when you have terrain layouts which have been very carefully kind of put together and pre-measured, anything which involves bumping terrain to put objective markers down is inevitably going to shift that over the course of the day and potentially lead to a map being played on which isn't accurate or is now imbalanced because it's been accidentally jogged.
Yeah, and I think so. Another thing that you just sort of touched on there as well, just previously, was you talked about how you managed to get all these terrain boards laid out. And obviously, for a lot of new TOs, trying to find the terrain that you need is quite difficult. How have you managed to solve that in the London community? Like, how have you managed to get 18 into the dartboards together, or Octarius and all that sort of stuff? Like, what's the recommendation you give to TOs to be able to get the terrain that they need to play the maps that you've made?
Yeah, this is a great point, and a point I should have touched on earlier. So obviously, I can introduce myself as one of the London TOs, because the reality is that we have many people involved in organising at every level, and so we have other people who have organised tournaments, like Isaac and Sean, and then we have the wider community who've done a huge amount in terms of bringing terrain to tournaments. And so essentially, this issue kind of cropped up at the very start of the edition, where I was hosting tournaments at our local board game cafe, the Badminton Cafe in Bermondsey. And at that time, we were just using the 40k terrain they had available. And that kind of worked okay for the last edition, but this edition, where terrain is so important, using 40k terrain just kind of wasn't really cutting it, because the proportions aren't quite there. And I thought, how can we kind of increase the quality of terrain? Because I can ask my local cafe to buy some more Killteam boards, but the reality is they aren't going to buy 18 in the dark boards, for example.
Yeah.
And so I put a shout out to our members of our kind of community in London if they'd be interested in bringing their own terrain boards to the next tournament, and I got an incredible response. So I think the first tournament I kind of put that shout out for at the very start of the edition, I hadn't expected a small handful of boards, maybe 3 to 4, but I think we ended up being kind of 10 terrain volunteers for that very first tournament, which really blew me away and completely transformed the kind of level of terrain we were able to offer at our events. And that culminated now in the event which you referenced earlier in December, which was an Into the Dark team tournament, where we got a record 18 Into the Dark boards, all entirely sourced from a terrain volunteer, which was really humbling, actually. And it's probably one of the most satisfying parts of organising for me, seeing everyone kind of willing to chip in and help out and just help create these amazing events.
I think that's probably indicative of a lot of the Killteam community that I've experienced anyway, is that everyone is dead keen just to be like, right, I've bought this box set, I really want to use it. And if you, as a TO, if you say to people, hey, do you want to use all that terrain that you've bought? Like, do you want to paint it up and that sort of and bring it in? Then you'd be surprised how much of a response you get. So I think it's the best way about going and doing it, and it's made for some really awesome tournaments from us. And it's each time that we have a tournament in London, it feels like the quality of the tournament is going up and up, which is pretty epic. As we're talking about terrain, it's probably worth mentioning. So when I think about densities of terrain, I think the average board in my mind is if you took all of the plastic out of one of those Octarius boxes or one of the Chownath, whatever, and put it on the table. That to me is like an average density of terrain. And then if you add stuff to that via like crates or whatever else, that becomes a dense or a more dense board. And if you take stuff away, that's a less dense board. You're sort of the map packs that you guys have created are sort of focused on that average density, isn't it?
Yes. So I mean, I think the kind of ambition for all our map packs is to create a competitive kind of map which is good for tournament play, just based off the contents of each of those kill zone sets. And so if you think about the Octarius box set, the kind of idea is that we'll create a map which you can recreate at home or at a tournament or your own event, just using the contents of that box. And the same goes for the Nackmund and Chandler maps, and potentially even the Morik maps if Ryan gets his way. But
there needs to be more Morik. Okay. All right. So we're going to put ourselves in the mind of like a new gamer that's coming to the hobby, doesn't really know too much about the tournament scenes, and we'll sort of go through it. So imagine that you didn't have a brother who is going to every single tournament ever and invites you to all of them. How are you going to go about finding out about these tournaments? Do you have any recommendations on where you would look to try and find some that might be local to you, or ways to get more information on them?
That's a great question, and I'm definitely more kind of a London centric in terms of that's my kind of playing community, and that's where I play. But yeah, if I'm not kind of based in London, or how would I find tournaments? I think so. In London, for example, we're very lucky to have a very active WhatsApp Killteam group, which is the kind of LWG Killteam WhatsApp, and I think there's almost kind of 200 people in that, and it's this kind of great forum for kind of sharing, information about events that are happening, hobby tips, kind of competitive gaming tips. It's just a kind of a general kind of forum for discussing Killteam, and it's also been a good forum to advertise tournaments, kind of let people kind of know about events that are happening. But obviously, WhatsApp is you have to be invited to it. It's not that not that straightforward. So, I mean, when I'm advertising a tournament, one of the kind of main kind of avenues I advertise it in is Discord, and in particular, Andy's or Glass Half Dead's Discord, who's a very popular Killteam content creator who also has a very active Killteam Discord. And he's got threads for both events and also a thread for London in particular. And so that's where I'd kind of advertise most of my tournaments, and also where I kind of hear about tournaments in other areas actually, because we're in a great position now where there are tournaments happening all over the country, and I see a lot of those advertised there. So I'd probably say Discord is your kind of first point of call, and then obviously Best Goes Pairings is an app we use to organise tournaments, and it's also a good way of kind of seeing where tournaments might be happening, because most tournaments will create an event on BCP. Ideally a good time ahead of the event, and so that's obviously another way of checking in and seeing what's around.
Yeah, it's amazing. If you go on that event listing function, like the amount of times I've just looked for something on a day, and I've seen a bunch of events that are happening, but I had no idea that they were happening, and some of them you might want to go to. So I think you're absolutely right. Like the way that I've found a lot of events is through Discord. And there's also the Command Point Discord, Andy's Discord, or Glass Half Dead's Discord, and I'm sure I'm not on the other ones, but I'm sure there are other Discords that have event listings as well. I think if you're a TO and you want to try and grow it, you've got to throw it out there, because I think the first tournaments that they did up in Manchester, they just did on BCP, and they started off around 8, then they grew to 16. And then they started putting them on the Discord, and they've got almost 40 players at an event now, like each event, which is insane numbers. It's as big as we're doing down in London, which I think is a real success story as well. So I think those are good ways of getting it out there, and hopefully people will then see it and turn up. I think, but I guess we'll see. But obviously, talking about London competitive scene, last year you had 12 events, and it was obviously that was very focused on the way that the edition came out. So it was all open board, correct, and it ended with a grand final. But what's different about next year for the London scene? What sort of things we have to look forward to coming up?
Yeah, so I think last year was, as you said, all kind of open board. Obviously, this year and going into next year, we're now in the Into the Dark season, and so we have this new kill zone to play on, which is close confines and a very different playing experience to open world. And so we're definitely keen to have more tournaments using that. So I think over the course of 2023, we'll definitely have a combination of formats, so including we'll still have open world tournaments, but then there'll also be Into Dark tournaments, and even potentially mixed tournaments where you have a combination of Into Dark and open world, and then most likely be at a team tournament. And so it kind of gives another strategic element to think about if you're playing a team tournament, about what board you want particular players or factions playing on, depending on whether they're better on Into the Dark or open world. So we'll definitely be giving all of those a hit in the next year.
So I'll be interested to know your opinion on this from a TO's perspective. I have it from my player perspective. When ITD first came out, obviously there was quite a big discrepancy in point scoring between the two game modes, right? So ITD was far less, particularly on primaries, is where it was at, was far less scoring. So a lot of turn ones you couldn't score at all, and potentially you would be scoring maximum 9 points or so. So doing a mixed tournament, obviously if you're against someone who could be scoring 12 points quite easily on a primary, that can be hard for a pairings and placement kind of perspective. They've obviously changed that now, and they've now got 6 objective markers on each for both ITD and for open board, and it looks like the missions are going to be the same. So from a TO point of view, is that going to affect your opinion on mixed tournaments? As in, like, are they more valid now, less valid now? And also, I guess, what's your thought on pairing and placement? Has that changed with these new competitive changes as well? Probably quite a big question. We can break it down.
No, that's a great question. I'll go with the first one first. So I guess in terms of tournaments with a mixed terrain, and by mixed, and I mean combination into dark and open board, I think they're good for team tournaments, because then if you're playing a team which is really kind of skewed towards one format, you can kind of coordinate with the teammates to try and make sure that they get to leverage their skills in into dark or open board. In a singles event, whether I'd have mixed terrain, I'm kind of less keen on having a mixed terrain at a singles event, for the reasons that it kind of forces you to take a team which kind of flex into both, and perhaps kind of limits your options in that sense. And then I guess in terms of pairings and placings, I've been thinking a lot about this, because initially we used victory points as the kind of first tiebreaker for pairings, and also for placings. We put a lot of weight on victory points. But when we moved to the kind of fixed table format, where everyone's playing a kind of potentially a different mission each turn, suddenly that wasn't as valid, because some missions have far higher primary scoring than others. So if you're playing Master of the Terminals, your kind of total VP score inherently is going to be a lot lower than someone playing on Loot and Salvage or one of the higher scoring missions. And so I guess thinking about the new format, I think especially because TAC Ops are now free choice, I think there's going to be a lot more kind of it's far easier now to score high in TAC Ops. So I think TAC Ops kind of loses some of its strength as a kind of metric of player skill or how someone's performed in the game. And now everyone has potential to score maximum primaries as well. I think we're kind of looking at kind of victory points now as the new kind of first tiebreaker for pairings and second tiebreaker for placements.
That's really interesting, and I think so. For people who aren't too familiar with sort of the whole pairings and placement terminology, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the way it sort of works is your pairings is each round as you go through the tournament, the opponent that you're going to be paired with is your pairings, and you're saying the primary determiner of that at the moment is going to be your max VP scored each game. So if you went 18-0 on your first game, you're likely to win or get paired with someone with 18-0 as well. But I guess the important thing is it's always winners paired with winners, and then it's how you're differentiating between winners, right?
Yes, correct. And so so I guess, so as you were saying, so in our last kind of few tournaments, we've been doing kind of pairings based on tournament points, and then TAC Ops, and for the reasons that you had some agency of your TAC Ops, whereas primaries can be dictated by the mission you got kind of randomly placed on, because different missions in now the old format had different potential kind of primary scoring opportunities. That's obviously different in the new edition, and furthermore, I think TAC Ops are a lot easier to score now. Now they're free choice. And so in that sense, if we were still using TAC Ops, there's just far less kind of variation in that if everyone's scoring 4 or 5, even kind of 6 TAC Ops. Whereas victory points, there's kind of a wider kind of bell curve to reflect player skill and how they've done in their previous games. So I think that's definitely an interesting change, which we'll probably implement in the coming tournaments.
I think in that there is... Sorry, you go ahead, Connor.
So that's such an interesting point, because I was sitting reflecting on it, and just admittedly it was a knee-jerk reaction, but I was thinking that the agency you have over TAC Ops is actually a way to distinguish players, and those people scoring 5 instead of 6 when it's a free choice is actually a good way. But you're saying no, because you've got the TO perspective. It's actually not a good metric, and we need to maybe look at things from a different way. That's really opened my eyes there.
I think interesting as well, just building on this, I think this is a really important competitive point, because if you want to go to tournaments and place and win, understanding how placements are determined and how pairings are determined are really important. So these are the questions that I think you want to know going in, because I know at Warhammer World they were using TAC Ops, and obviously you're saying max EP is probably the way London's going to go. So this is good to know, because you're going to adjust your play style, and you might try and score more primaries in order to adjust Vice going for a TAC Op or a more risky TAC Op to be able to get a higher placement.
Yeah, no, and I think it's one of those things we kind of we're constantly evolving at least in the kind of London tournaments, and so the format and the kind of what we've used for pairings and kind of placings has changed over the course of the years. We kind of we learn more about the game and we kind of think about different formats, and so yeah, at least my kind of my first inclination is that kind of victory point should now replace tac ops as the kind of second or the first tiebreaker, sorry, for pairings. But it's one of those things. We'll see. We'll see how that develops, and if it turns out that tac ops perhaps actually are a better indication of player skill, then perhaps we'd go back to that.
Yeah, like every now and then I trawl through the discords and see what people are thinking about various stuff. And I know a lot of people have commented on that potentially the mission scoring in this new edition feels like it might be easier to get draws. But I think my point of view is that if you're playing to draw, you're not going to win, right? So like you're never going to get to the top of the leaderboard if you're drawing every single game. Like, you won't get to the top three. But also, I think there's a skill in the player to know how many points am I scoring and how many points am my opponent scoring. And being able to compress your opponent's score is just as important as being able to score highly yourself. So it's certainly an interesting one, but it's good to know, right, is it worth me getting an extra VP now, or is it worth me denying my opponent 2 VP? Does that make a difference between winning or losing, and how's that going to play out? And if you understand that going into the tournament perspective, then you're much more likely to have success, because I'm sure there are plenty of people that turn up to Warhammer World at the weekend, where it was tac ops with the primary means of tiebreaker, and they didn't know that, and they were just out there just trying to score primary points when they could have been scoring tac ops, and potentially they fell down the leaderboard as a result. So I think that's a really important thing to get out of that. I've got one other sort of question on the new changes as we're sort of covering it now. So one of the quite big changes that's come out is that of the scouting step. And I know that for some people, particularly the fortify ability is seen as a big contentious problem. So you've obviously designed a whole bunch of tournament maps. Has this scouting step change? Is that going to affect your approach to map design? Are you going to be re-releasing a map pack along with that, or are you going to say that's part of the game, or are you going to say we're not going to play with it at all? What's happening in London?
Yeah, I mean, all these changes have been quite. I guess there's quite a strong reaction to them when they were first announced, and I'm sure you were following the kind of conversations on the Discords and the other forums, and people
Quite
were initially kind of yes, very, very, very heated, and I think. And I definitely had a similar reaction in terms of, I think the most contentious one is the one you raised, which is being able to put a barricade on the vantage point, because we spent a lot of time kind of learning how to make maps, and part of that learning was that vantage points are so powerful, you have to kind of find ways to negate them. And one of them is making sure that the vantage point isn't overlooking, for example, every objective on the map. Another one is just making sure that there isn't cover on the vantage point, and a lot of vantage points inherently have cover. So your terrace building, has a kind of fencing on at least one side of it. And the way to negate that is you kind of rotate the building, and so it's open facing towards the center, if you will. So you can't find cover on the vantage point. Obviously, this new change means that you can put cover on the vantage point at will if close enough to your deployment zone. I mean, I think I've seen some of the solutions being suggested that you just make sure that there are no vantage points within 3 inches of the drop zone. But that is, to me, that's not a great solution, because vantage points are inherently tied to heavy cover in most of the boards. So, for example, Octarius, most of the heavy cover is from those Octarius buildings, which are also the vantage points. And you need heavy cover protecting the deployment zones. And so if you're going to move the heavy cover away from the deployment zones towards the center, suddenly, you're making the drop zones a lot more vulnerable, which isn't good, because no one likes to get out of the strike 10-1 in the deployment zone. It makes for a very quick game. So thinking about it more holistically, I actually had a great chat with at Warhammer World with one of the game designers there, actually, who was there while we were playing the tournament, and someone brought up this change to him, and he made an interesting take in that most of the teams which have a sniper, which can shoot from conceal, either that sniper is not very good i.e. it's the recruit sniper or the blooded sniper, or if it is good, it's on a bad team, i.e. Castigan. The one notable exception, obviously, is Pathfinders. However, we shouldn't balance maps and the whole game around Pathfinders, and if Pathfinders are a problem, they'll sort it out. So I thought that was a really interesting take because, your first thought, everyone panicked, like, how do you deal with the sniper on the vantage point? But to be honest, it's only really Pathfinders. Obviously, Vertigo have a very good sniper, but that sniper doesn't need to be on the vantage point. It has the spot, it can be on the ground floor. So I thought that was a really interesting take on the issue.
I think as well, what's interesting to me is it's changed up, I guess, for quite a lot of teams what the scouting step means, and it is a shake up to the meta, and I'll be interested to see how it plays out. And I'm reserving judgment until I get some more games in and properly play it. But it's interesting to me how it's going to change potentially the weighting of certain abilities, like the ability to deal with a sniper on advantage in cover is something that certain teams have. So breaches have their cat ability to be able to get rid of that. Warp Coven have their indirect psychic action, which can do a long range sort of fire blast. Pathfinders have the marker lights. You have the spotter in the Vex Guard, etc., etc. Teams have these abilities, and obviously that's going to now be stronger to be able to deal with it as a change. So it's interesting, as you say. I think it's probably a common mistake would be, or an easy mistake to make for a new TO would be to try and deny someone that ability to have that what's quite a strong thing, and then suddenly losing all cover in their deployment zone. And there is nothing that a Pathfinder team would like more than being able to see a bunch of light cover lying in the deployment zone, and Vantages 3 inches away when they can recon sweep to it anyway, and then move up and do it anyway. So I think that's a really good point. And it's not just about balancing it around one team, but thinking about how many teams can go.
As you guys have got your head in the Discords and the chat quite a lot. Has anyone looked at it from the perspective, obviously it's very strong having this cover on a vantage point, but there is a cost, and the cost is you don't have infiltrate, and I think infiltrate is very strong as well. And then is that a potential drawback, not having that, and the trade-off between the two? Is there any discussions going on there?
I think we're still in the hysteria phase, so
Oh my god, change!
Come around to that more reasoned, view of things, because I think it is a very good point. As in, they've made the other scouting options competitive. As in, you would have never taken Fortify before. Now Fortify is very interesting, and if you have that, that model that can shoot from silence, suddenly, that's a good reason to take it. So, I mean, they have made it more of an interesting, decision in the scouting phase as opposed to infiltrate every time with a few exceptions.
But no, I think you're hitting on there with something, Connor. It's like before, for a lot of teams, that being able to flip order was the most important, and it's pretty disgusting. Pathfinders are the ones that can abuse it probably the best, with both either the Grenadier or the Gun Drone being able to flip order turn one, go up threat, and do quite a significant amount of damage. So if they're sacrificing that to be able to get a sniper in a good position, well, that's that is a payoff. And I like the fact that it's making players make more decisions, because it would be the only time I would be doing something different was if I wanted to really force my opponent to have initiative, and often that wasn't the case. So yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward with that as well. I think we're touching about it now, and I know that I've got a list of things that I think of when I'm designing maps, of what makes a good map and what makes a bad map, and you've covered off on a few of them. But do you have any more thoughts, Pete, on when you're looking at map design in your head, what you think makes a really good map or makes a bad map?
So I guess just touching on what we talked about in terms of vantage points and how powerful they can be. Kind of building a board where the vantage points aren't overpowering is really important. And so, as you mentioned previously, one way of making them weaker is not having to cover on that vantage point. But obviously, that can now be overridden with the fortified change. But the other point, which still holds, is that being control of that vantage point doesn't dominate the whole field. You can't see every objective on the map. And so, I'm thinking about the maps we've created in the LWG, and even if there's now a concealed sniper behind a barricade on a vantage point, the reality is that sniper's only going to be able to see one. if he's lucky, 2 objectives, and even then, probably in both those objectives, there's going to be some heavy cover or some way of negating, that threat. So, so I think just kind of keeping that in mind when placing vantage points, not to make them too powerful, based on those principles, either kind of making them not safe to stand on, or kind of making sure they don't kind of overlook all the objectives is a good thing to keep in mind. Something that also came to mind this weekend in the Warhammer world, where we were playing on a variety of kill zones that they had there, was the importance of ensuring there aren't choke points for models of certain base sizes. And so I think the biggest space we have in Killteam is 40mm, and you get those, for example, on Hunter-clad infiltrators, or Galloppox, or the blooded Ogryn, and you need to ensure that a 40mm base can kind of safely fit between all the various choke points, between a barricade and a heavy building, or the oil rig and the piece of scrambled terrain you've got on the board. Otherwise, you create these really uncomfortable choke points where a model kind of can't fit through and has to go the long way around, or just has to go in a really inoptimal way. So making sure kind of every model, regardless of base size from 25 to 40mm, can kind of fit around the board comfortably, I think is really important thing to keep in mind.
I think as well, if you stick with that sort of 40mm base size idea, it then means barricade placement can be quite useful as well, because you can use barricades to block off those access points, or leave gaps for 25mm to go through, that kind of thing, to give your own team an advantage. I think there is one exception to 40mm, which I want to say it's like the Necron Cryptek, but that team needs a nerf anyway, I think, because they're performing way too well at the moment in the high-tech circle. So that they need. I jest because I think they have fly, but yeah, that is, I think, the one exception I can think of. But I think 40mm as a go-to is probably it. And the other point that you raised, having heavy in the midboard is so important. If you put 2 lines of heavy on each of the deployments and just litter the midboard with light cover, it is a shooting gallery for shooting teams to live and die on. But you don't want that. You want a little bit of heavy cover on some of the objectives, not all of them, or maybe from certain angles, but not all angles, to try and give some intelligent thought in a barricade placement, but also tactical play. I think that's probably going to cover off everything that we wanted to cover so far. We are going to just go with one more sort of tactical tip. We'll try and bring this in as a segment of every episode, where we come through and we sort of give something as a sort of a throwaway comment, which is hopefully useful for players immediately going away. And Connor and I discussed this one quite a bit, because it's probably I don't want to say most common mistake, but it is a common mistake that people do, which is, I guess, incorrect use of their command points. And so the command point reroll is like the easiest trap to fall in, because you really, really want to use it sometimes. Like, you think to yourself, I really want to use this because I've rolled 3 1s on my plasma gun and my guy's going to die, but I really want to just get one of those into a hit to try and get some damage through against this Space Marine, whatever it is. But the question that I always think you have to ask yourself is this reroll going to actually change the board state? So is you changing that dice from a miss to a hit going to remove that model from the board? Is it going to save your model from dying? Is it really going to is it going to change the VP score? Are you going to get you're going to plant signal beacon on it or something like that? Is it going to actually make a big swing? And the next question you've got to ask yourself is, what is the chance of it actually coming off? So if you're CP rerolling like a 5-up, it has to be a win or lose roll, right? Like if you roll a 5-up, you immediately win the game. Done, fine. That is worth the risk. But if you're doing it because it might keep a guy that's sort of inconsequential alive, then I really don't think it's worth it. So understanding as and when to use that command point reroll is really valuable. Anything you want to add on that, Connor? Or do you think I've covered that one off?
Yeah, there's something that you do quite nicely when you talk about your command points in general. You almost see them as like a balance sheet. You know that you're going to start the game with 2. You're going to generate 1 every turn. Then depending on what faction you're playing, you might get some freebies thrown in there, and you go like, okay, across the game, I'm going to get this many points. I'm going to use 2 then, 2 then, 1 then. That means I've got 2 command points throughout the game for me to do command point rerolls, because sometimes you can do a command point reroll and you go into the next turning point and you're like, I can't do that tactic that I wanted to do. Whoops. So if you think about it in that way, this balance sheet idea and how are you going to actually use them throughout the game, and then go, okay, well, I've got 2 command points to deploy at some point during this game. I might use it now. This seems like a really important role. I think it might change the game state. Yeah, this is the appropriate time to pull it.
And just thinking of examples immediately off the top of my head, I went to a tournament a couple of weeks ago playing Navy Breaches, and that exact thing happened. I'm there thinking I can re-roll this 4-up save and maybe save this armsman, and is that worth it? But then I realised that by spending that point, I'm then going to lose brace for counterattack for the whole next turning point. So how many extra lives are going to be saved by having that -1 damage across the board for an entire extra turning point? And it's going to be significantly more than potentially that 1 life on a 4-up. So a 50% chance for something that's not going to necessarily rock the world, not worth it for me. I'll take the guaranteed -1 damage. But hopefully that's a useful metric. Just ask yourself whenever you're going to use that command point reroll, does this change the board state? And what are the chances of it actually working? Are the 2 questions you've got to ask yourself before you spend that point. Okay, I think that's it. So, Pete, thank you so much for coming on. It's been fantastic to have an opinion and a voice from the London tournament scene. I'm really excited about what's going to happen next year because you've got so many big things planned. So, thank you so much for spending your time with us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Sweet. So that brings us to the end of this episode. Hopefully you found something new or useful while listening. If you did, throwing us a like would be greatly appreciated. And if you want to make sure you don't miss any episodes, make sure you subscribe as you get notifications as soon as the next one drops. If you can't wait and you want some early access, we do have a Patreon where you can get exclusive access to all of the content ahead of time. But as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts and feedback, so drop a comment and we'll get right to you. Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Ryan. This has been Turning Point Tactics, and Connor and I will see you next week.
See you next week.